In 1881, the clean linen at Audley End depended on two named women and two adjoining rooms. Sarah Barrance was first laundry maid. Ellen Findell was second. Between the wet laundry and the dry laundry, one used sheet became part of a weekly system that kept family clothes, household linen, and staff uniforms ready for use. That division between wet and dry gives us the first secure fact about how the work was organized. English heritage preserves both rooms in the service wing as part of an arrangement representing the house in 1882. Water, soap, soaking, boiling, and rinsing belonged on one side. Drying, pressing, starching, and ironing belonged on the other. Clean linen did not come from a single act called washing. It was carried through a route. Follow one sheet along that route, and the mansion changes shape. The sheet begins in a bedroom as an ordinary part of household comfort. Once used, it enters an inventory. It must be kept apart from materials that need different care. It must survive water, alkali, pressure, and heat. It must dry fully, return without a scorch mark, and be ready when the household requires it again. Sarah's documented duty was to manage this weekly cycle. Ellen's title places her beside Sarah in the same laundry, but lower in its hierarchy. That is already enough to recover a working system without inventing a private scene between them. If you value documentaries that keep the surviving records separate from reconstruction, you can subscribe to Dynasty and Dust. That distinction matters here because Audley End preserves the women and the rooms, while period handbooks help us understand the process that could connect them. The sheet now leaves the bedroom, but it does not leave the household. It moves into the part of the house designed to make comfort possible for someone else. At Audley End, that supporting world was not a single basement corridor. The service wing contained a servant's hall, butler's pantry, kitchen, pastry larder, cook's room, scullery, dry larder, meat safe, game larder, coal shed, wet laundry, dry laundry, dairy maid's sitting room, dairy, and dairy scullery. Each room separated a kind of work from the rooms where the results appeared. The laundry belonged to that geography of separation. A clean tablecloth could enter a dining room without carrying the heat of the copper with it. A starched shirt front could appear at dressing time without advertising the sequence of soaking, rinsing, drying, and ironing that had shaped it. A sheet could return to a bed without the family following its passage through foul water and steam. The house received the finished object. The service wing absorbed the process. Audley End was large enough to make this division seem architectural, but its history had always joined display to expense. Thomas Howard began rebuilding the house in the early 17th century, on the scale of a royal palace. Later owners reduced it, altered it, connected its surviving ranges, and added working offices. Robert Adams' work in the 1760s included new kitchen offices. By the late Victorian period, the building still carried the logic of a great house: formal rooms for representation, private rooms for the family, and specialized rooms for service. The separate wet and dry laundries show that washing was understood as a chain of unlike stages. Wet work asked for drainage, water supply, heat, and surfaces that could be cleaned. Dry work asked for airflow, space, pressure, controlled heat, and protection from renewed dirt. To move linen from one room to the other was to cross from extraction to finish. Dirt had been removed, but the object was not yet fit to return upstairs. That is the first answer to the central question. What stood between used linen and clean linen was not merely effort, it was sequence. Each stage changed what the next stage could safely do. Sorting determined method. Method affected rinsing. Rinsing affected color. Drying affected whether the mangle or iron could finish the cloth. Heat could help at several points, yet excessive or misplaced heat could set a stain, discharge a color, shrink wool, or scorch a finished surface. The week was a controlled passage through those risks. The room names also help us resist an easy mistake. Surviving service spaces can tempt us to populate them with a complete imagined morning. It would be simple to place Sarah at a particular tub, give Ellen a particular iron, choose the weather, and describe what each woman thought. The rooms do not authorize that. They show how the labor was divided and what the space could support. English heritage establishes names, ranks, and a weekly duty. Period manuals establish what informed households considered correct practice. The responsible reconstruction begins where those kinds of evidence meet and stops where they separate. Sarah Barrance enters the record with a title that carries more meaning than it first appears to hold. First laundry maid was not a loose label for the older of two women. In a graded servant hierarchy, a first or head maid generally carried supervisory duty, handled the more delicate or valuable work, and answered for the laundry's results. English heritage makes Sarah's Audley End duty explicit. She managed the weekly cycle so that the house had enough clean linen, clothing for the family, and uniforms for the staff. That sentence contains 3 different customers. Household linen included the reusable fabric that moved through bedrooms, dining rooms, washing spaces, and service rooms. Family clothing demanded care with fabric, stitching, and outward look. Staff uniforms made the workers themselves part of the visible order of the house. A servant could be performing heavy work in one part of the day and still be expected to appear in clean, regulated clothing when duty required it. Laundry, therefore, supported both comfort and hierarchy. Ellen Findell appears as second laundry maid. Her title establishes assistance, but it does not tell us the tone of her working relationship with Sarah. We do not know whether Sarah instructed her patiently, corrected her sharply, shared a joke with her, or rarely spoke beyond the needs of the work. None of that should be supplied because 2 names look lonely on a page. Their positions already produce a meaningful relationship, first and second worker in a laundry, where the week's output depended on coordination. Large items made that coordination practical as well as hierarchical. Period directions described some stronger articles as needing 2 women for wringing. Long sheets and table linen had to be lifted, spread, kept from dirty surfaces, and carried between stages. Even when a particular task could be performed by one person, the weekly flow could not simply pause while each item waited for the same pair of hands. One worker might prepare the next material, while another completed a rinse or watched the heat. That is a reasonable account of workflow, but it remains an account of how such a 2-person laundry could function, not a recovered timetable for one Audley End Tuesday. The surviving labels let us see Sarah's say, without turning her into a housekeeper. Her world was the laundry. The sheet entrusted to it was not hers, and the household that expected it back was not organized around her convenience. Yet within that narrow territory, the result required knowledge that other servants could not casually replace. A damaged collar, gray sheet, shrunken flannel, or scorched cuff would expose failure at the final surface. Good work disappeared into the normal look of the house. That invisibility was structural. The family encountered clean linen ready to use. A bed was made, a table was laid, a shirt was presented. Staff uniforms were available. The proof of successful laundry was that nothing interrupted those acts. Sarah's work gained significance from the number of routines it quietly enabled, while her name remained far less visible than the names of the people who owned the linen. Ellen's trace is thinner. English Heritage reports that she may have traveled to London with Lord and Lady Braybrookes to carry out laundry duties while they stayed at their townhouse. The qualification matters. May have is not a decorative phrase. It marks a possibility supported by the household's movement and the nature of her role, but not a journey that can be narrated as certain. The same source explains that her name was easily misspelled, making further census research impossible for its investigators. One unstable surname can narrow a life. Census research depends on names being recorded, transcribed, indexed, and matched across dates and places. A servant might move between households, counties, occupations, or marital names. When spelling varies, a plausible match can multiply into several people or disappear from a search altogether. The result is not permission to choose the most appealing Ellen. It is a limit. Sarah and Ellen therefore reach us unevenly. Sarah is tied to a managerial duty. Ellen is tied to a subordinate title and a possible London journey. Then the line breaks. Their documentary imbalance should not be repaired with fiction. It should shape the episode. Sarah can stand at the center of duty because the record places her there. Ellen can remain present in the work without being assigned a later life the evidence cannot support. The same discipline applies to the laundry process. No Audley End washing book has been used for this reconstruction. There is no recovered page listing that week's sheets, collars, aprons, table linen, and uniforms. We cannot count the pieces, state the exact day on which each category moved, or put a particular formula into Sarah's hand. Instead, the process evidence comes from household manuals published for the world in which the two women worked. Isabella Beeton's Book of Household Management appeared in 1861. Its laundry section is detailed enough to show the dependencies between rooms, materials, heat, water, and time. The Servant's Practical Guide appeared in 1880, 1 year before the Audley End census, used by English Heritage. It describes household scales, laundry hierarchy, wage ranges, and the social position of laundry maids. These books are prescriptive. They tell readers how a well-run household was supposed to operate. They do not prove universal obedience, and they do not turn a general rule into an Audley End fact. Prescriptive books still matter because rules reveal what failure looked like. A manual tells a laundry maid to separate colored fabric from whites because mixing them could damage color. It tells her to test an iron because scorching was a known risk. It assigns days to stages because wet linen could not instantly become finished linen. The rule does not prove that every worker followed it. It identifies the problem that required judgment. This distinction changes the language of the reconstruction. We can say that Sarah managed a weekly Audley End laundry cycle because English heritage says so. We can say that period guidance began Monday with check and a washing book because Beaton says so. We cannot join those statements into a quotation from Sarah's own schedule. The honest bridge is narrower. A woman managing a late Victorian country house laundry would have confronted the same categories and material risks that the contemporary manuals tried to regulate. With that boundary fixed, the sheet can enter the week. We will not claim to know which bedroom it came from, how long it had been in use, or who carried it down. We can know what its arrival created. It became one accountable item among many. Before it touched hot water, someone had to recognize what it was, what state it was in, what could be washed with it, and what method might destroy it. The first machine in the laundry was judgment. Beaton's model week began on Monday morning with examination. The laundry maid was to enter the articles committed to her care in a washing book. That book was more than a count made for neatness. It established custody. Linen left the rooms where it had been used, crossed into a laundry, and was expected to come back. If an item was already torn, badly stained, or missing, a check, before washing, separated an earlier problem from damage caused in the laundry. The washing book also gave the week a measurable beginning. A great house relied on fabric that circulated. Sheets moved between beds, cupboards, and laundry. Towels moved between washing stands and stores. Tablecloths and napkins passed from meals to sorting heaps and back to the dining rooms. Staff clothing returned to workers who needed it for duty. A lost piece was not a small domestic mystery. It reduced the household's working stock. Inventory turned that movement into duty. Sarah's documented task was to ensure that enough clean linen, family clothes, and uniforms remained available. Enough is a managerial word. It means the work was judged not only by how white one sheet became, but by whether the laundry supplied the house at the required pace. A perfect finish delivered too late could still become a household failure. A fast wash that damaged cloth created another kind of shortage. The washing book in Beaton's prescription placed each item inside that tension. The laundry maid counted before she transformed. She had to recognize which pieces could safely share water and method, then keep track of them as the original group, divided across tubs, lines, drying spaces, mangle, starch, and irons. The book anchored the many branches of the process to one obligation: return what had been received. The period manual divided the incoming work into 5 broad groups. White linen, collars, sheets, and body linen formed one. Fine muslins formed another. Colored cotton and linen fabrics were separated into a third. Woolens formed a fourth. Coarse kitchen and other greasy cloths formed a fifth. The list is useful because it refuses the idea of laundry as one substance called clothes. Our sheet belongs with the white linen, but that does not mean every cloth followed the same method. It can tolerate operations that a dyed cotton or delicate muslin might not. It is broad and strong enough to be mangled, while a constructed garment with gathers needs an iron. It may require two people to wring or spread without dragging it. The category predicts the work. The distinction between white and colored fabric is chemical as well as visual. Soda could assist the washing and boiling of white linen. The same alkaline method could discharge color. Sunlight might help whiten a sheet spread to bleach, while a delicate color was supposed to dry in shade. Water that helped remove dirt from one material could shrink or distort wool if too hot. The laundry maid's success depended on not transferring a sound method from the wrong category. Fine muslin created another problem. Its value could be high while its strength was low. Rough wringing, crowded washing, or an unsuitable iron could tear, mark, or scorch it. Greasy kitchen cloths occupied the opposite end of the range of methods. They could be expected to tolerate harsher soaking and longer boiling because their grime demanded more aggressive work. To combine those two groups would be convenient only until the result appeared. Sorting, therefore, created 5 different risk maps. For white linen, incomplete soap removal could leave a poor color. For dyed fabric, soda or sunlight could drain the desired color away. For wool, heat and handling could change shape. For muslin and lace, force could tear what dirt had not destroyed. For greasy cloths, a mild method could leave the grime in place. Clean was not a single technical state. The categories also carried social meaning. Family fine linen, body linen, staff uniforms, table linen, and kitchen cloths did not occupy equal positions in the household. Period hierarchy assigned upper laundry workers to the finer family linen and under workers to house and servants' linen. The division reflected value, visibility, and risk. It did not mean the lower categories were optional. A kitchen could not work indefinitely without clean cloths, and a servant could not appear properly dressed without a clean uniform. The hierarchy decided who answered for the most sensitive surfaces, while the house depended on all of them. Sarah's managerial role would have required this kind of traffic control, even if Audley End's exact groupings differed from Beaton's 5. The household expected multiple textile streams to move through shared rooms and gear without contaminating one another or missing their return. Ellen, as second laundry maid, worked inside that division. A first and second maid were not simply two identical pairs of hands. Their titles placed decision and assistance in an order. The first test of that order came before soaking. Beaton told the laundry maid to examine every item for ink, grease, fruit, and wine stains. A stain had to be red because the wrong first action could make later cleaning harder. General washing might lighten ordinary soil while leaving a concentrated mark. Heat could fix some substances more firmly. Strong chemicals could remove the mark and weaken the cloth around it. The handbook offered specific methods. Ink involved hot water, followed by oxalic acid or salts of sorrel, then rubbing and cold rinsing. Grease called for yellow soap and hot water. Fruit and wine were assigned other solutions. We should hear these recipes as advice from the period, not as a list of bottles proven to have stood on Sarah's shelf. Their historical value lies in the diagnosis. The laundry maid was expected to identify causes and select methods. That demand gave her a form of practical command. A stain showed how cloth had been used. Ink might come from writing or accounts. Grease might come from a kitchen, lamp, machine, or food. Wine marked a different kind of accident. The laundry maid did not need to reconstruct the scene in which it happened. She needed to understand what the mark would do in water and what the proposed remedy would do to the fabric. The work demanded restraint because successful stain removal could create invisible damage. Oxalic acid is not a moral symbol. It is a substance that can attack a mark and also requires control. Soda can release soil and affect dyes. A lime wash can assist coarse, dirty cloths and has no place as a casual answer for delicate material. The competent choice was the narrowest method that solved the actual problem. This is where experience entered before strength. A novice could scrub harder because the mark remained. An experienced worker might pause, change method, lower the heat, or keep the item out of the main wash. That change of method is difficult to preserve in household records because successful judgment leaves the cloth intact. The handbook preserves it indirectly by warning against foreseeable mistakes. Consider the sheet again. Its broad white surface makes stains visible, but its strength creates temptation. It can be rubbed, wrung, boiled, and mangled more aggressively than fine muslin. Yet repeated harsh handling shortens the life of linen. The household wants two things at once: a clean surface now and a durable object over many cycles. Sarah's weekly duty sat between those demands. The washing book and stain check formed a single control stage. The item was counted, classified, and assessed before the irreversible parts of the process began. If the result later proved poor, the laundry could not recover the hours already spent or instantly replace damaged household stock. The safer decision came early, when the linen was still dry enough to examine and separate. Monday then moved from judgment to setup. In beaten sequence, sheets and fine linen were placed in a tub and just covered with lukewarm water containing dissolved soda. They remained there until morning. Greasy and dirtier cloths went into another tub with a lime-based liquor that had itself been boiled, settled, and strained. Separation continued in water. Soaking looks passive because hands can leave the fabric for a time. Technically, it changes the next day's labor. Water penetrates fibers and loosens material before rubbing. The added substances alter how soil releases. A load prepared correctly on Monday can be worked differently on Tuesday from a load dropped into hot water without planning. The waiting belongs to the process. It also binds one day to the next. The laundry maid had to know what Tuesday required before Monday ended. Beaton instructed that coppers and boilers be filled and fires laid ready to light. Fuel, water, tubs, and sorted loads had to align. If anyone was missing at the start of washing, the schedule slowed while wet material waited. In the service wing, this setup connected the laundry to other household resources. Water had to reach the working room. Coal or another fuel had to be stored, carried, and burned. Ash had to be managed. Drains had to take foul water away. Soap, soda, starch, blue, and stain methods had to be supplied. Clean linen emerged from a laundry. But the laundry rested on an estate economy. The wet laundry's architecture existed for that burden. Beaton's ideal washing room contained a boiler and furnace proportioned to the family's needs. Tubs were arranged for workers to bend over them, with hot and cold taps and bottom drains. The floor was to be stone or asphalt, sloping toward a gutter. Steam needed a route out. This was a room intended to accept water and dirt without letting either defeat the work. Audley End's preserved wet laundry directly confirms the room function, not every fixture in Beaton's ideal plan. The comparison helps explain why a separate wet room mattered. Repeated filling, draining, heating, wringing, and scrubbing belonged to a different room from ironing. If the same room had to protect dry, finished linen from splashes, smoke, steam, and dirty water, each stage would interfere with the next. By the end of Monday, the sheet has changed, even though it still appears unfinished. It has been entered, sorted, inspected, assigned to a method, and placed in soak. The fire has not yet heated the copper, but the decision about what will enter it has already been made. The apparent pause overnight is actually stored work. This is one of the quieter mechanisms of a well-run house. Tomorrow's start is built in advance. A fire laid before it is needed. A boiler filled before the room grows busy. A load divided before colors can run. And a stain treated before heat can fix it all, reduce tomorrow's uncertainty. None creates a dramatic final object. Together, they make the final object possible. The weekly cycle Sarah managed can be understood in the same way. Running the laundry was not confined to inspecting a finished pile. It involved keeping the next state available. Enough clean linen required enough dirty linen to enter the system in time, enough gear to remain usable, enough fuel and water to process it, and enough finished stock to cover the interval before the load returned. Ellen's second position becomes especially important at these handoffs. One person can record while another moves pieces. One can prepare a method while another fills or cleans gear. One can carry forward the coarser work, while the first maid reserves care for fine linen. We cannot assign those exact actions to a named hour at Audley End, but the hierarchy existed to keep stages from collapsing into a single queue. The Monday residue is a room prepared for heat. Separate tubs contain separate problems. The copper is full. Fires wait to be lit. The sheet lies under lukewarm water, no longer part of the bedroom, and not yet part of the clean store. It has entered the interval on which the house depends. Early the following morning, Beaton's prescribed sequence began with lighting those fires. The phrase early morning matters because the day needed time for washing, boiling, rinsing, and outdoor drying or bleaching. A delay at the fire shortened the hours available to air and light. The weather could not be ordered to wait for the copper. Heat was a resource that had to be produced, not a setting selected on a dial. Fuel was carried. A fire was built and kept. Water warmed at the rate allowed by the furnace, vessel, and load. The room filled with the consequences: steam, damp surfaces, hot metal, and repeated movement between tub and copper. The worker had to judge water that was changing while the work continued. The period manual placed sheets and body linen early in the sequence because they were meant to whiten in the morning. Each article came out of the liquid in which it had soaked, then was rinsed, rubbed, wrung, and set aside until the first tub could be emptied. foul water was drawn away before the tub was filled again. The sheet did not move forward through one permanent bath. Each change of water removed what the previous stage had released. Beaton recommended a second filling with lukewarm water at about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That number should not be transferred into Sarah's hand as a recorded Audley End measurement. It tells us that period practice distinguished warm from hotter water and treated temperature as a controlled variable. The worker needed water warm enough to support cleaning, but not so hot that every category could be treated alike. In that water, each article was soaped and rubbed again. The handbook noted a gap between novices and experienced washerwomen. A novice might rub linen against the skin. An experienced worker rubbed one linen surface against another. The method saved her hands, allowed her to work longer, and cleaned two surfaces at once. That small rule is one of the clearest records of embodied knowledge in the process. The lesson is not simply to endure more pain. It changes the contact point. Cloth works against cloth while the hand controls pressure and direction. The worker protects her skin enough to sustain the shift and gains efficiency without a machine doing the judgment for her. Our sheet makes the scale of the technique visible. It is too large to treat as a cuff. It must be gathered, controlled, soaped section by section, and kept from touching a dirty floor. Water makes it heavier. Wringing creates a long object under tension. Beaton said that larger, stronger articles could require two women. Their hands had to coordinate force, not merely apply it. Paired wringing also exposed a limit of speed. Twist too gently, and the sheet carried excessive foul water into the next stage. Twist or pull carelessly, and the fabric experienced unnecessary strain. Let one end fall, and a cleaned portion could meet the floor. The task involved a shared rhythm, but the record does not give us Sarah's voice counting it out, or Ellen's posture at the tub. We can describe the dependency without staging the scene. After the first washing, the linen entered a second water as hot as the hand could bear. Each part was examined again for remaining spots. A stubborn mark was re-soaped and rubbed. This check after washing mattered because the first stage changed visibility. General soil had lifted. What remained could now be isolated. The sequence therefore alternated change and judgment. Soak, inspect, rub, inspect, heat, inspect. Laundry was not a straight mechanical push toward whiteness. At several points, the worker had to decide whether the result was ready for the next operation. If a stain entered boiling untreated, the chance to remove it safely could narrow. The water itself became evidence. Foul water leaving the tub carried released dirt, soap, and method residue. Clearer rinse water suggested progress, but did not by itself prove the fiber was free of soap. Touch, color, smell, and the way water left the cloth all informed practical judgment, even though the surviving directions do not quantify each sign. Experienced workers built a library of such comparisons through repeated loads. This expertise was easy for a household manual to demand and hard for a servant to acquire quickly. The same book that presented orderly rules assumed a worker who could recognize the state those rules described. Hot as the hand can bear is a bodily measure. Thoroughly clean is a visual and tactile decision. Wring gently is a rule whose meaning changes with fabric and garment shape. Sarah's rank placed her closest to the consequences of those decisions. A second maid could perform substantial portions of the labor, but the first maid's duty was expressed in the returned linen. If fine material was mishandled, the laundry could not answer by saying that the written rule had been followed in the abstract. Someone had to recognize whether it applied to the object in front of her. The wet laundry was therefore a place where hierarchy and technique met. Rank did not eliminate manual work. It organized accountability inside it. Sarah managed the cycle. Ellen occupied the second position, and both titles belonged to a laundry, defined by water, heat, fabric, and the household's timetable. Once the white linen had been washed and checked, the copper became the central instrument. Beaton prescribed boiling for about an hour and a half in water containing a measured amount of soda. The purpose was to remove remaining soap and produce a good color. Some laundresses placed the linen in a canvas bag to protect it from scum and the sides of the copper. Boiling looks like the moment when heat performs the hardest work. It was also a point of concentrated risk. Linen had to remain submerged and move enough for soap and alkali to reach it. The copper surface could mark or damage fabric. Too much soda could attack fibers. A crowded vessel could produce uneven results. The worker could not put the lid on a process and stop thinking about it. The hour and a half in the handbook is a prescription, not a stopwatch reading from Audley End. Its significance is duration. Fuel had to sustain a large vessel of hot water for a long interval. During that interval, other loads still occupied the room. Colored fabrics and woolens could not simply follow the white sheet into the same method. The copper created a schedule around itself. Fuel connected clean linen to estate labor beyond the laundry. Coal had to be purchased or supplied, moved to storage, carried into the service area, and converted into heat. English heritage identifies a coal shed among Audley End service rooms. The sheet's whiteness was therefore linked to material stored under another room name. A household surface that appeared light and clean depended on a dark, dirty fuel. Water carried a similar chain. It had to be available in large enough amounts for soaking, successive washes, boiling, hot rinsing, cold rinsing, and cleaning the gear afterward. A large load did not consume one tub of water. It passed through several bodies of water, each serving a different function, and then becoming waste. Drainage was as important as supply because foul water had to leave without returning grime to the room. The boiling stage changed the sheet's state, but did not finish it. When the linen came out, Beaton prescribed another rinse, first in clean hot water, and then in abundant cold water lightly colored with fig blue. The hot rinse helped remove soap from the hot fabric. The cold rinse carried the process toward its final color and temperature. Bluing did not dye the linen blue in the ordinary sense. A slight blue tint countered the yellow cast that could make white fabric look dull. The effect depended on proportion and distribution. Too little failed to change the look. Too much or uneven mixing could produce visible marks. Whiteness was made partly by controlling color. That fact complicates the word clean. The sheet could be free of ordinary dirt and still fail the visual standard of the household if it looked yellow or gray. A lightly blued surface appeared whiter because the eye read the balance differently. The laundry delivered both cloth free of dirt and the white look the household expected. Colored fabric required the opposite discipline. Beaton warned that soda could discharge color and that even an overnight soak in pure water could damage delicate tints. Such pieces were to be washed quickly in cold water with yellow soap, one article at a time, then rinsed and dried away from strong sun. The method protected what the white linen sequence tried to alter. Woolens formed another branch. Very hot water increased the danger of shrinkage. The handbook recommended lukewarm water around 85 degrees Fahrenheit with yellow soap, followed by extensive cold rinsing. Greasy cloths were treated more aggressively and could be boiled for 2 hours. The numbers differ because the materials and grime differ. A busy wet laundry, therefore, held several clocks at once. White linen soaked overnight and boiled for one duration. Greasy cloths followed another. Silk handkerchiefs had their own soaking and washing requirements. Colors needed speed and protection. Wool needed controlled warmth and rinsing. The week was not a procession in which every item advanced together. Sarah's task of maintaining enough finished stock becomes clearer inside this branching schedule. The house could not wait for the entire laundry to reach one final moment. Some categories returned sooner, some demanded more care, and some depended on weather. The first maid had to see that parts of the load would finish at different times. Ellen's second position made the branching physically possible. While one category occupied the copper, another could be rinsed, lifted, hung, or prepared. While delicate items received care, coarser items still had to move. The period hierarchy described the upper maid as responsible for fine family linen and the undermaid for house and servants' linen. At Audley End, first and second titles create a compatible structure, but we should not pretend to know that every piece followed the manual's exact division. The better inference is functional. 2 ranked workers allowed valuable, delicate, and visible work to receive supervision, while the large volume of ordinary household linen continued. Responsibility moved with risk. The finest article demanded knowledge that a simple count of hours would not capture, while the greatest quantity demanded sustained organization. When the white sheet came out of its final rinse, it had survived the wet sequence. Dirt and method residue had been drawn away. Its apparent color had been corrected. It was wrung again, yet it was now heavy, creased, and vulnerable to whatever surface received it next. Clean did not mean ready. Beaton directed the rinsed linen out of the washing house to dry or bleach, preferably early in the day. Timing linked the indoor process to outdoor air and weather. A late fire or slow copper could send the sheet to the line after the best drying hours had passed. A well-organized Monday mattered because Tuesday's light was finite. Drying removed water, but bleaching used exposure to help whiten linen further. The cloth could be hung or spread where the property allowed. A country house had an advantage over an urban home because it could provide space for drying and bleaching. This was one reason period manuals associated home laundry more strongly with country and suburban houses than with dense towns. The advantage came with dependence. Rain delayed drying. Damp air slowed it. Wind could accelerate drying and complicate control of large cloths. Sun helped white linen and threatened delicate colors. Dust, smoke, birds, vegetation, and dirty lines could mark a load after hours of washing. The laundry extended beyond the walls without leaving the maid's duty. Our sheet now reaches its most exposed stage. It has been cleaned enough that new dirt will show. It is large enough to catch wind and touch the ground if handled poorly. It must dry throughout, not merely at the edges. Folding damp linen too soon could trap moisture. Leaving it out too long or in bad weather could undo the desired finish. This is where the phrase semi-outdoor servant, used by the 1880 Servant's Practical Guide, gains practical meaning. The guide said that a laundry maid ate in the servants' hall and lived in the house, yet worked in a laundry that was usually detached. Her place in service crossed an architectural boundary. The laundry belonged to the household, while its needs pushed it toward yard, line, bleaching ground, fuel store, drains, and weather. Audley End's laundry sits within its service wing, rather than needing the exact detached arrangement described by the general guide. The category still identifies the social ambiguity. Laundry work was domestic because it cared for household textiles. It was semi-outdoor because water, steam, smoke, drying space, and physical separation made it unlike personal attendance in a bedroom or table service in a dining room. The contrast also explains why urban households often sent washing out. Space for wet rooms, drainage, fuel, steam, lines, and bleaching was expensive. Beaton observed that professional laundresses and companies handled much town washing, while some fine items remained at home. A country estate could internalize the process by dedicating rooms, staff, and land to it. Audley End internalized enough of that process to employ Sarah and Ellen as named laundry maids. Their presence proves that the house kept a working laundry. The household did not merely own linen. It maintained a laundry able to transform used textile stock week after week. After the main washing, the wet laundry itself had to be restored. Beaton instructed workers to rinse the tubs, clean the coppers, scrub the floor, and put everything back in order. This was not an optional act of tidiness added after the real work. Residue left on gear would enter the next load. A copper could hold scum. A tub could retain dirty water or chemical traces. A floor could transfer grit to a dropped edge. A clogged or slow drain could leave standing water where workers needed to move. The system that cleaned linen required its own cleaning cycle. Upkeep also created the next week's start. The washing book might close on one load, but gear had to be sound for the next. A cracked tub, dirty iron, weak line, poor drain, or unreliable furnace could become a bottleneck larger than any single stain. Sarah's duty for the weekly cycle, therefore, extended beyond fabric to the state of the means by which fabric moved. Again, successful upkeep tends to disappear from the archive. A clean copper is not a dramatic object. A floor scrubbed after the load does not appear in the bedroom. Yet the clean sheet depends on both. The household's visible order was built on repeated resets in rooms its guests were not expected to study. By the time the wet room is restored, the sheet is drying elsewhere. Its water has entered drains or air. Fuel has become heat, smoke, and ash. Soap and soda have done their work and must not remain in the cloth. The laundry has converted material resources into a surface that looks simple. The price of that simplicity is the complexity left behind. The threshold between Audley End's wet and dry laundries now becomes the decisive handoff. On one side, work was organized around removing soil with water, method, heat, and rinsing. On the other, the problem was to remove disorder from clean cloth. The sheet had to become smooth, fully dry, correctly folded, and ready for storage or return. Separating the rooms protected the dry process from the wet one. Steam could damp finished linen. Splashes could mark it. Smoke or dirty water could force a clean item back into washing. The dry laundry required surfaces that remained clean enough to receive fabric at its most exposed. The further the sheet advanced, the more expensive a new mark became because it threatened to repeat earlier stages. Beaton's ideal dry room contained an ironing board positioned for light, a strong white deal table about 12 to 14 feet long and about 3.5 feet wide, drawers for ironing blankets, a mangle, clothes horses for drying and airing, cupboards for irons and starch, and a hot plate over a furnace. The details describe a production room rather than a spare chamber with an iron. The long table provided a clean plane for large linen. A sheet could be opened without immediately falling to the floor. Several pieces could be arranged, folded, or prepared in sequence. Ironing blankets could cushion the surface. Light helped a worker see creases, dirt, scorch, and the progress of the iron. Storage kept tools and compounds near the work without placing them on finished cloth. The hot plate turned ironing into another fuel-dependent operation. Several irons could be heated and exchanged because one iron cooled while in use. Waiting for the same piece of metal to reheat would interrupt the finish and change the worker's pace. A supply of irons allowed heat to circulate through the tools as linen circulated through the room. Ventilation mattered here as well. Damp cloth released moisture. Heated irons and drying arrangements warmed the room. Beaton recommended a route for steam and described an adjoining hot air closet as a preferable arrangement where available. The purpose was not luxury. Moist, stagnant air worked against drying and against the health of people spending hours in it. Audley End's direct evidence is the wet and dry division itself. We should not fill its dry room by borrowing every object from the handbook. Comparative properties show that the broader gear pattern was real. Castle Ward preserves irons, presses, airing racks, a stove, and an ironing board in its 19th century laundry. Those objects belong to Castle Ward, not Audley End, but they show the material family to which the written prescriptions refer. The handoff into the dry room changed the governing danger. In the wet room, insufficient cleaning left soil and soap. In the dry room, excessive force or heat could damage a surface already clean. The laundry was approaching its most visible result, and the tolerance for mistakes narrowed. The first major finishing instrument was the mangle. Beaton described mangling as passing fabric between rollers under considerable pressure. The process smoothed sheets, towels, table linen, and similar flat articles. It was not suitable for every object. Clothing with buttons, gathers, folds, or a shaped garment needed different handling. Our sheet is made for this stage. It is broad, flat, and without the complex structure of a bodice or collar. Before entering the rollers, it must be prepared so that creases do not become deeper faults. Edges need alignment. Dampness must be appropriate to the gear and desired finish. The worker guides a large object toward pressure while keeping hands, folds, and fabric under control. The Mangle exchanged repeated hand smoothing for concentrated mechanical pressure, but it did not remove judgment. Feed a sheet crooked, and the pressure confirms the crookedness. Leave a fold, and the rollers can press it sharply into place. Include an unsuitable constructed item, and hard parts may mark the fabric or the machine. The tool amplifies setup. Pressure also made the sheet legible as a finished household object. Washing had removed what did not belong. Mangling arranged what remained. Fibers and folds aligned. The large surface became easier to store, handle, and place on a bed. The operation reduced visual evidence of the wet stages. The gap between mangling and ironing reveals why the laundry needed categories all the way to the end. Flat linen could receive pressure over a broad area. A shirt front, cuff, collar, gathered dress, lace edge, or shaped undergarment demanded access to smaller planes and curves. One instrument could not finish both safely. Beaton's list of irons reads like a map of those shapes. Common flat irons came in several sizes, from about 4 to 10 inches long. Oval irons served more delicate articles. Box irons held a heated insert. Italian irons presented a heated cylindrical surface over which frills and pleated pieces could be drawn. Crimping and goffering tools formed regular folds. These specialized tools show that finish was not a vague pursuit of smoothness. It was the recovery of an intended shape. A frill was supposed to retain controlled shape. A shirt front was supposed to present a particular plane. A collar had to hold form around the neck. A tablecloth needed a broad, even surface, without being treated like a gathered garment. Mangling, therefore, paid one part of the weekly promise. The sheet that crossed into the dry room could now become smooth through pressure. Yet other pieces in the same load branched toward starch and irons. The dry room contained its own parallel schedule, just as the wet room had separated whites, colors, woolens, and greasy cloths. Period guidance placed Thursday and Friday in a fully employed laundry under the heading of mangling, starching, and ironing. That schedule makes visible how long the week's change could take. Monday was check and soaking. The following stages handled washing and drying. The later days produced finish. Clean household stock returned through a pipeline, not at the end of a single morning. Starch created structure by adding something to cloth after washing had removed unwanted material. Beaton described a paste made by mixing starch with cold water and then pouring in boiling water while stirring. Extra gum could increase stiffness. Some workers added wax from a candle to help produce a smooth look and reduce sticking under the iron. The contrast is important. Soda, soap, lime liquor, and rinse water were used to release or carry away dirt. Starch deliberately remained in or on the fabric long enough to change how it behaved. Laundry was not simply purification. It included controlled addition. A collar or shirt front became socially readable through that addition. Stiffness held a line. The finished form signaled that the garment had passed through skilled care. The person wearing it carried the laundry's work into a public room, while the substance and hands that produced the line remained out of sight. The quantity of starch had consequences. Too little failed to create the required body. Too much could leave a harsh or uneven surface. Lumps could mark fine fabric. Water not fully boiling might fail to thicken the mixture as intended. The paste had to be strained and protected from forming a skin. Once again, an apparently modest household effect depended on temperature, proportion, timing, and cleanliness. The starched item was squeezed rather than roughly wrung, then briefly dipped and rolled in clean cloth until ready to iron. Fine material could tear if handled carelessly at this wet, stiffening stage. The worker needed enough moisture for the iron to finish the surface without leaving the article saturated. Starch also created a new risk under heat. Material that sticks to an iron can drag, smear, or scorch. The worker's control of the paste affected the later control of metal. No stage ended completely when the next began. Sorting shaped washing, washing shaped drying, drying shaped starching, and starching shaped ironing. For household uniforms, this finishing labor had a special circularity. The laundry maids were servants, maintaining the clothes through which service appeared orderly. A clean, properly finished uniform helped other workers meet the visual expectations of their positions. The staff became part of the house's presentation, and the laundry supported that presentation from a less visible rank. Family clothing carried a different weight of value and scrutiny. Fine linen and delicate stitching could be costly to replace. A first laundry maid's duty for such pieces was not simply a privilege within servant hierarchy. It exposed her to the consequences of damage. The cleaner and more refined the final surface was expected to look, the less room there was for a trace of the work. The iron was the last major trial. Beaton stated directly that proper ironing required much practice and experience. The worker prepared a clean table, cloth, blanket, stand, and iron rubber. She had to know that the iron itself was clean and at the right heat before beginning. An iron gathered risk while it heated. Soot, rust, scale, old starch, or dirt on its base could transfer to the cloth. A spot delivered at this stage came after inventory, sorting, soaking, washing, boiling, rinsing, drying, and perhaps starching. The closer an item came to completion, the more prior labor the spot destroyed. Testing was therefore a production control. The handbook recommended trying the heat on coarse cloth before touching anything fine. Goffering tools could be tested on paper. The test sacrificed no valuable article and converted an uncertain temperature into visible evidence. If the cloth scorched or the paper reacted too quickly, the iron was not ready. This simple test expresses the gap between confidence and verification. An experienced worker could estimate heat by proximity, sound, moisture, or time, but she still used another surface to confirm it. Skill did not eliminate the test. Skill understood the cost of skipping it. The iron cooled as it moved. Pressure, speed, fabric dampness, and the thickness of the ironing layers all changed the result. An iron too cool could fail to smooth and could leave dampness behind. An iron too hot could yellow, shine, stick, or scorch. The usable window moved, which is why several irons and a hot plate mattered. The worker's body became part of the control system. She lifted a heavy object, judged its heat, guided it over fabric, returned it, and took another. The motion repeated across large surfaces and concentrated details. Her free hand arranged cloth close to the path of hot metal. The task demanded endurance, but endurance without care would multiply mistakes. Ironing a sheet did not require the same precision around a garment's shape as finishing lace or a pleated article, yet its size created repetition. The iron had to travel across the surface in an order that did not create new creases. Edges and folds needed care. The broad white plane made discoloration visible. A scorch near the center could not be hidden in a seam. The final folds were part of the finish. Folding reduced the sheet into a form that could be carried, counted, stored, and opened by another servant making a bed. The laundry's output had to survive the cupboard as well as the iron. Linen put away damp, crooked, or dirty could fail after leaving Sarah's immediate view. The clean store, cupboard, basket, and route upstairs belonged to the last handoff. Another worker might receive the linen. The household's inventory closed its loop when the correct item returned to use. Sarah's weekly duty was not paid merely by creating a beautiful surface in the dry laundry. It was paid by availability. At that moment, the sheet became ordinary again. Its passage through chemical distinctions, fuel, water, weather, pressure, and hot metal, vanished into a folded rectangle. A housemaid could take it to a bedroom. A bed could be remade. The person who later lay between the sheets encountered cool, smooth linen, not the branching decisions that produced it. This disappearance of mechanism is one reason servant work is easy to compress in family histories. Owners leave letters, portraits, buildings, settlements, and inheritances. A clean sheet rarely identifies the person who cleaned it. The object survives only if valued enough to enter a collection, and even then, its repeated upkeep may not be recorded. Audley End gives us an unusual repair because English heritage connects the service rooms to named workers. Sarah Barrance is not simply an anonymous figure placed beside a tub as a symbol. She appears as first laundry maid with a defined managerial duty. Ellen Findell appears as second laundry maid. The architecture and titles align. Their hierarchy can be sharpened by the Servant's Practical Guide, published in 1880. The guide described a head laundry maid, second laundry maid, and, in the largest households, a third. It said the upper laundry maid attended to fine linen for the family, while under laundry maids dealt with house linen and servants' linen, where only one laundry maid was kept in a smaller country establishment. Lower servants might assist with their own cotton dresses for a few hours. This model confirms that laundry rank followed divisions of duty. It does not give us Audley End's private duty list. English heritage says Sarah managed linen, family clothes, and uniforms across the weekly cycle. The general guide suggests how first and second positions could distribute that field, but the exact allocation remains unrecorded in the sources used here. The distinction matters most around valuable work. Fine family linen demanded close care to stains, material, starch, and iron. House linen created bulk. Servants' linen and uniforms had to return on a dependable schedule. If Sarah concentrated on delicate pieces, while Ellen carried more of the ordinary volume, that would match the general hierarchy, but it remains a possible pattern rather than a quoted Audley End rule. What can be said with confidence is that the two titles were not interchangeable. Sarah's first position carried management. Ellen's second position carried subordinate work within the same laundry. Their cooperation was built into the fact that one weekly cycle had to deliver several classes of clean textile to several parts of the house. The guide's phrase, semi-outdoor servant, further locates them. Laundry maids could live in the house and eat in the servants' hall, while working in a building or laundry physically set apart. They belonged to the domestic establishment, but their workplace was shaped by water, fuel, yards, and drying space. Their rank cannot be read only from how near they stood to the family. A lady's maid might work directly around one woman's body, clothing, jewelry, and room. A housemaid moved through bedrooms and reception spaces when occupants allowed. A laundry maid received objects after use and returned them after change. Her intimacy with the family was material rather than personal. She knew the state of their linen without necessarily being present in their private rooms. That material intimacy brought knowledge. Stains, wear, repairs, and repeated washing revealed which pieces were used heavily and which were fragile. The laundry could see consumption as a pattern, yet the laundry's obligation was not to interpret the family's life. It was to preserve and return the fabric on which that life depended. Staff uniforms placed the hierarchy inside the load. Sarah and Ellen washed or managed clothing that expressed the ranks of other servants and possibly their own. A footman's livery, housemaid's cotton dress, apron, cap, or other working garment carried both labor and regulation. The laundry turned marks of work back into marks of order. This creates a quiet inversion. The people whose labor was meant to remain unobtrusive required another group of laborers to maintain that look. A servant's clean outward look was not an individual achievement alone. It depended on access to the laundry cycle, sufficient replacement clothing, and time for items to pass through the laundry. Sarah's duty for enough uniforms was therefore operational. If all examples of a required garment entered washing at once, another service team could be short of its proper uniform. If a stain method delayed one piece, the inventory had to cover it. If damp weather slowed drying, the consequence could appear on a servant scheduled for duty. The first laundry maid had to think in rotations. Dirty and clean stock existed together. Items moved at different speeds. Some could tolerate a rapid, strong wash. Others needed to wait for care. The house consumed clean fabric continuously, while the laundry produced it in batches. Running the laundry joined those different rhythms. The hierarchy inside the laundry also shaped training. Ellen's position as second maid placed her where technique could be learned, practiced, and judged under duty above her. Period manuals imagined competent servants, but households had to create competence through service. A worker learned the gap between enough heat and too much, between a fold and a fault, between a stain that would lift and one that needed special method. We cannot say how Ellen learned, how long she had worked in laundries, or whether Sarah taught her. Her title shows only that she occupied the second position by 1881. It would be tempting to use that gap to write a story of apprenticeship. The safer account leaves training as a general function of hierarchy and Ellen's personal path unknown. Even so, the titles change our understanding of the sheet. It did not pass through undifferentiated servant hands. It entered a ranked laundry. At each stage, the value and difficulty of the object affected who was expected to answer for it. The first maid's say and the second maid's labor met at the finished surface. The 1880 guide also gives period wage ranges. It listed a head laundry maid at 18 to 25 pounds per year. A second laundry maid was listed at 16 to 20 pounds. A third was listed at 12 to 16 pounds. Where one laundry maid served alone, the range returned to 18 to 25 pounds. These figures are not Sarah's and Ellen's pay. No Audley End wage account is being used here to establish what either woman actually received. The tariff is valuable as a period comparison. It shows how a contemporary manual priced positions of different duty in cash terms. Annual wages were only one part of the terms of service. The same guide discussed allowances for tea, sugar, beer, washing, board wages, clothing in some male roles, and travel arrangements in particular cases. Food and lodging could be part of the employment relationship. That does not make the cash figure meaningless. It means the figure cannot be compared to a modern salary without reconstructing a much larger system. The ranges overlap. A highly paid second laundry maid could approach or exceed a lower paid head maid elsewhere. Household size, location, experience, competence, and private arrangements affected pay. The tariff describes a market demand, not a scale enforced in every house. What remains striking is the relation between the range and the duty the manual assigned. A head laundry maid could answer for valuable family linen, supervise other workers, manage a weekly flow, and protect household stock from damage. The period guide translated that duty into a range that sat among other female servant wages, not into the status of an independent professional commanding the household. Sarah's Audley End title and documented duty make that comparison legitimate only when the boundary stays visible. We can say that a guide, published close to the census year, valued head laundry maids at 18 to 25 pounds annually. We cannot choose a point in that range and place it in her purse. The same is true for Ellen. Her second title resembles the guide's second laundry maid, whose period range was 16 to 20 pounds. But resemblance of title does not prove the exact terms of her engagement. Her actual wages, allowances, savings, family obligations, and future prospects remain outside the record used here. The uncertainty does not weaken the human engine. It prevents false precision. Sarah and Ellen carried duty for objects whose ownership, value, and social purpose belonged to the Braybrookes household. A period tariff lets us see how the servant economy ranked their positions while leaving their individual contracts where the evidence leaves them. The cleaner conclusion comes from the ranges themselves. First and second positions were close enough in pay to belong to the same skilled laundry, yet separated enough to mark rank. The household purchased not only hours of rubbing and ironing, but a hierarchy able to control risk. That hierarchy worked in a laundry whose physical position was unlike the rooms where most of its products were used. The 1880 Guide's account of a semi-outdoor servant is useful precisely because it does not fit a simple upstairs and downstairs map. A laundry maid could be a resident member of the indoor staff, eat in the servants' hall, and still spend her working life in a room separated by yard, corridor, or purpose from the heart of the house. Laundry wanted distance for practical reasons. Steam needed escape. Wet floors needed drainage. Smoke and fuel created dirt. Large quantities of water had to enter and leave. Drying required air and often outdoor space. Boiling and ironing produced heat for hours at a time. The operations threatened the comfort and surfaces that the main house was designed to protect. Distance also hid evidence of consumption. A household's dirty linen recorded bodily use, meals, soot, work, weather, and accident. Moving it to a separate laundry removed those traces from formal rooms. The family could experience clothing and linen as renewed objects because the dirty interval took place elsewhere. Audley End's service wing organized that interval beside other transformations. Raw food moved through larders, kitchen, pastry room, and scullery before appearing as a meal. Coal moved from shed to fire before appearing as heat. Milk moved through dairy rooms before becoming household produce. Linen moved through wet and dry laundries before reappearing as order. The rooms were a map of processes that the finished house concealed. The service wing also made departments dependent on one another. Kitchen cloths became a laundry problem after cooks and maids used them. Staff uniforms tied every laundry to the clean stock Sarah managed. Fuel delivery linked the coal shed to copper and hot plate. The servants' hall gathered workers whose duties had separated them during the day. The laundry was specialized, not isolated. This is why a single sheet can reveal more than its own wash. Its root touches household accounting, architecture, fuel, water, drainage, labor rank, textile knowledge, storage, and bedroom service. No one of those systems explains the mansion. Their coordination does. Comparative sites make the spatial choice easier to see without turning one house into another. At Mentmore Towers, historic England records a complex built around 1870 to 1880 that formerly combined lodge, laundry, and accommodation for laundry maids. The laundry formed an L plan around a central yard. Its roof carried louvered vents. Work and home were built into one service ensemble. Mentmore is not Audley End. Its plan, materials, household, and staff cannot be imported into Sarah and Ellen's story. It does show that elite households could treat laundry as purpose-built architecture. Ventilation, yard access, and accommodation were not incidental features added to a normal bedroom. They were responses to what the work required. The louvered vents at Mentmore make steam visible as an architectural problem. Moist air had to leave without making the room unusable. A central yard made movement between buildings and outdoor work practical. Housing laundry maids near the laundry reduced the distance between workers, and a schedule that could begin early, continue across heating and drying intervals, and answer to weather. Castle Ward offers another comparison through surviving gear. Its 19th century laundry retains an ironing board, irons, presses, airing racks, and a stove. The objects correspond to functions described in period manuals: provide heat, apply pressure, hold linen while air circulates, and create a clean surface for finishing. None proves which tools Sarah touched. Together, they show the material density behind the word laundry. Charlecote Park preserves laundry within a service courtyard that also contains brewhouse, kitchen, and scullery. The grouping places laundry beside other processes involving water, heat, food, cleaning, and repeated supply. It belongs to the working household as a laundry with its own room, while remaining close enough to exchange goods and labor with neighboring departments. These comparisons produce a more careful image of Audley End. We do not need to invent a complete floor plan beyond the rooms English heritage identifies. The wet and dry division already tells us that the estate recognized two incompatible phases. Comparative architecture confirms that airflow, yard access, heating, racks, presses, and dedicated surfaces were common answers to the same technical pressures. The sheet crossing from wet room to dry room therefore crosses a designed boundary. Its movement is not just a convenient walk. It transfers duty from one environmental regime to another. On the wet side, drains protect the room from used water. On the dry side, clean tables protect the sheet from the room. The direction of protection reverses. That reversal changes how workers move. Wet work can tolerate splashing on surfaces built to be scrubbed. Dry work cannot tolerate a dirty hand placed on finished linen. Fuel may heat both copper and irons, but ash cannot be allowed near the final fold. The same laundry has to manage dirt aggressively and then behave as if dirt is an intruder. Sarah's say stretched across that reversal. English heritage does not define her as first wet laundry maid or first ironer. It says she managed the weekly cycle. Her duty followed the load from receipt to enough finished linen. That required an overview broader than any one tool. Ellen's second position followed the same route at another level. The work could not be divided permanently into Sarah thinking and Ellen lifting. Sorting, stain method, heat control, wringing, mangling, starching, and ironing all combine judgment with physical execution. Rank decided who carried final duty, but neither title floated above the manual process. The laundry's semi-outdoor position may also have shaped how its workers were seen by other servants. Personal attendants worked close to family members. Footmen appeared in formal service. Housemaids entered rooms before or after occupants. Laundry maids could spend much of the week among tubs, lines, coppers, and irons. Their product circulated farther through the house than they did. The servants' hall connected those unequal forms of visibility. A period guide specified that the laundry maid ate there even if her working place was detached. She entered the collective life of service through meals and a room in the house, while returning to a laundry physically edged away from reception rooms. Her place in the household was real, but structured by task. This social geography helps explain why Ellen's possible London travel is so revealing. English heritage suggests that she may have accompanied Lord and Lady Braybrook to their townhouse to undertake laundry duties. If so, a worker based in a service laundry at a country estate crossed into another household setting because the family's need for textile care moved with them. The possibility should remain exactly that. No train time, packing list, street, sleeping room, or London wash day can be supplied from the cited claim. We cannot say how often she traveled, or whether Sarah remained at Audley End. The value of the evidence lies in travel, not scene setting. A townhouse changed the material equation. Beaton observed that urban washing was often sent to professional laundresses or companies because bleaching and drying space was limited. Fine linen might still be kept at home. If Ellen performed laundry duties during a Braybrookes stay in London, the work may have involved different space, outsourcing arrangements, or a narrower class of items. Those are reasonable questions, not answers. Her second rank may have made travel easier to arrange. A household could retain its first maid at the country laundry while sending a subordinate worker with traveling family members, or it could divide duties in another way. English heritage's use of may have acknowledges a possible reading without closing the alternatives. The episode should do the same. What travels securely is the household's demand. Linen and clothing still had to be cleaned and finished when the owners changed house. A family's movement did not suspend the systems that supported it. Instead, servants, supplies, and duties moved or were duplicated. The townhouse extended the household beyond one building. For Ellen, that possible route enlarges her role without giving her a biography. She was not necessarily fixed beside one Audley End tub. Her labor may have followed the Braybrookes into London, yet the misspelling of her name prevents English heritage from tracing her story farther through census documents. Spelling seems like a small clerical matter until identity depends on it. A census enumerator heard a name, wrote it, and placed a person in a household on a particular night. A later indexer or transcriber interpreted the handwriting. A search system looks for strings that may not match pronunciation. Findell could become a neighboring spelling. One variation might still be recoverable. Several could produce people whose age, birthplace, and occupation only partly align. Servants create additional movement across the record. They changed employers. A laundry maid could appear in another county, enter another branch of domestic service, leave service, marry, or return to family. Each transition changes the details used to identify her. Without a stable surname, a plausible link can be mistaken for proof. The responsible result is a stopped line. Ellen appears at Audley End in 1881 as second laundry maid. A possible London duty survives in English heritage's reading. Beyond that, the record used for this episode does not let us choose among candidates. Her absence after the trace is a historical fact about the archive, not about her importance. Sarah's later story is also not expanded here, beyond the evidence assembled for the episode. Her surname and managerial role are clearer in the institutional account, but clarity at one date does not license a complete life. The focus remains the week that her documented duty allows us to reconstruct at system level. That focus avoids another distortion. A long account can create the illusion that time spent explaining a person equals the amount known about her. Here, most detail belongs to the process, not to private biography. Sarah and Ellen anchor the process because they are the named Audley End workers. The manual steps explain the technical world around them. They do not fill their silence with personality. The gap can be tested at every paragraph. Does a claim come from the Audley End record? Does it come from a period rulebook? Does it come from comparative architecture? Or is it a production inference about how one stage causes another? Each category can contribute, but none should borrow another source's weight. The Audley End evidence names the people, year, ranks, weekly purpose, possible journey, archival limit, and wet-dry room division. The handbooks describe ideal gear, sorting, methods, schedule, hierarchy, and wage ranges. Comparative properties show surviving forms of laundry architecture and tools. This account joins them through explicit boundaries. That joined structure lets the sheet complete its route without pretending it was a specific museum object. It is a representative piece used to keep the causal chain visible. It enters as used linen because the household needed such linen cleaned. It passes through decisions documented in period practice because those decisions explain the functions of the preserved rooms. It returns because Sarah's direct duty was to keep enough linen available. The object also prevents the scale of the mansion from swallowing the worker. Audley End's staterooms, dynastic history, art and architecture can draw the story away from the work. A sheet is physically modest, but the house could not sustain daily life without many such objects circulating. Following one forces the story to stay near hands, water, fuel, and time. It also reveals the unequal direction of service. The sheet moves down dirty and returns clean. Ownership does not change. The labor added to it belongs to the household's comfort. Sarah and Ellen receive wages and upkeep under service arrangements, but the finished value is carried upstairs. The wage tariff also shows that skill did not remove lower rank. The first maid could possess expertise over heat, stains, fibers, and workflow while remaining a servant under the household's command. Her knowledge mattered because the owner's textiles mattered. Her autonomy operated inside the duty to return them. At the same time, lower rank should not be confused with lack of agency in the work. Someone had to choose whether an iron was ready, whether a color could tolerate a given wash, whether a stain needed isolation, and whether a piece was dry enough to fold. The family could demand clean linen. It could not obtain that result merely by demanding harder. This practical agency appears most clearly where choices changed consequences. Sorting a colored fabric away from soda-preserved dye. Testing an iron on coarse cloth protected fine linen. Cleaning the copper kept residue out of the next load. Laying fires on Monday made Tuesday's early start possible. Each decision altered what happened later. The cycle was therefore causal rather than ceremonial. Country house routine is sometimes described through rigid schedules that make servants look like figures moving because a clock commands them. The schedule mattered, but it worked because material processes had durations. A sheet needed to soak, water needed to heat, linen needed to dry, Starch needed to thicken, and iron needed to warm and then cooled in use. Time in the laundry came from matter. Monday was useful for check and soaking because overnight waiting advanced the wash. Thursday and Friday became finishing days because washing and drying came first. Early morning offered time and better access to outdoor drying. The calendar did not merely discipline workers, it coordinated transformations. Weather remained the part of the schedule no hierarchy could control. The first maid might prepare the load perfectly and still meet damp air. A country estate possessed space, but not guaranteed sun or wind. Heated drying arrangements reduced dependence, though they consumed fuel and required airflow. The weekly stock had to absorb some uncertainty. Inventory provided that buffer. Enough clean linen meant the house did not depend on the immediate return of the piece just removed. A reserve carried bedrooms, table service, staff duty, and personal clothing across the processing interval. The laundry's success included maintaining that margin. The reserve also represented capital tied up in cloth. More sets made the household resilient, but cost money to purchase and space to store. Too little stock transferred every delay into a crisis. The first laundry maid managed work within an amount chosen by the household, even if the exact amount is not known here. This is why inventing a weekly piece count would weaken rather than strengthen the episode. A large number can create a vivid impression, but without an Audley End washing book, it would turn scale into theater. The documented categories already establish complexity. Management remains visible even when volume does not. We can still follow load dynamics. Large, flat linen consumed water, line space, mangling time, and storage. Delicate family pieces consumed concentrated care. Staff uniforms carried deadlines. Kitchen cloths needed harsher method. The laundry balanced bulk, value, grime, and visibility. At any moment, work in progress existed in several states. Some pieces soaked, others boiled, others rinsed or dried. Some waited for the mangle. Starched pieces rested before ironing. Finished linen accumulated for return. The weekly cycle was a moving inventory, not a pile that switched from dirty to clean at once. The wet and dry rooms acted like two broad stages inside that inventory. The wet room reduced soil and method residue. The dry room reduced moisture, crease, and disorder. The yard or drying ground linked them. Stores and household rooms waited at either end. The women linked them too. Sarah's duty gave the cycle continuity across stages. Ellen's help gave it enough hands. Other servants may have delivered or collected items, and period guides expected help in some smaller establishments. But the named Audley End roles establish a dedicated core. That dedicated core helps distinguish laundry from occasional household washing. A single person can clean a garment. A laundry exists because demand repeats at scale and must be scheduled against other demands. Sarah was not named as someone who washed when necessary. She was first laundry maid managing a weekly cycle. Weekly repetition produces expertise and wear at the same time. The same actions teach material judgment and strain the body. Water, heat, Lifting, rubbing, wringing, standing, and ironing repeat because clean linen becomes dirty again through use. The product is consumed without being destroyed, then returned for another cycle. This circularity gives laundry a different historical rhythm from building a mansion or purchasing a painting. A building project ends. A collection can remain. Laundry success lasts until the cloth is used. The cleaner the result, the sooner it re-enters use and requires the work again. The sheet embodies that rhythm. Its final fold is not an ending. It is ready for another turn in the bedroom. Once opened and placed on a bed, it leaves Sarah's laundry but remains inside the system she manages. Its return is already anticipated. Wear accumulates through both use and cleaning. Friction thins fibers. Alkali and heat can weaken them. Sunlight affects them. Mangling and ironing impose pressure. The laundry maid's challenge was to remove the evidence of use without consuming the object too quickly. Cleaning and long wear pulled in different directions. Period directions tried to control that trade-off by differentiating materials. Gentler washing for colors, moderate warmth for woolens, protection for fine articles, and heat testing for irons all preserve useful life. The rules are not merely aesthetic, they defend household property. This makes the first maid's knowledge economically significant. Damaged linen had replacement cost. Slow work required more stock to cover the interval. Poor rinsing dulled the cloth. Harsh washing shortened life. The laundry's skill affected household expenditure even if no laundry balance sheet is included in the source set. It also affected how the household looked. Clean white linen on a table or bed communicated care and resources. Starched clothing held expected lines. Uniforms made servants presentable. The household displayed the result across bodies and rooms without displaying the cost calculation behind it. The result could therefore reinforce hierarchy at several levels. Owners enjoyed clean objects. Senior servants answered for departments. First and second laundry maids occupied different ranks. The laundry processed uniforms that displayed ranks elsewhere. Fabric moved through the whole ladder. Yet the process itself repeatedly ignored social value in favor of material fact. A costly dyed fabric still lost color if treated with soda. A fine collar still scorched under excessive heat. A servant's cloth and a family's cloth both required soap to be rinsed away. Matter imposed limits that status could not negotiate. Skill lay in reconciling those limits with social demand. The house could require a white surface, sharp collar, or ready uniform. The laundry maid selected the safe route through water, method, air, pressure, and heat. She translated demand into procedure. That translation is the strongest answer to what Sarah managed. She managed not only a list of dirty things, but the conversion between household language and material language. Enough clean linen became tubs, loads, firing times, drying space, mangle pressure, iron heat, and cupboard stock. The demand came from above. Its solvable form was created below. Ellen worked inside that translation. Her second title means she did not carry equal formal say, but the laundry's output still depended on execution at every stage. A carefully chosen method fails if rubbing is careless. Correct washing fails if the sheet falls on a dirty floor. Proper starch fails under a scorched iron. The chain is only as secure as its handoffs. The two women remain difficult to see precisely because their good results removed evidence of the chain. If the linen returned clean and on time, the household continued. A disaster might generate complaint or account. Competence restored normality and left the record quieter. The preserved rooms reversed that disappearance. A wet laundry beside a dry laundry fixes the process in space. Their names say that the house required repeated change. The 1881 staff names fix duty in people. The manuals fix contemporary expectations in print. Together, they let ordinary success become historical evidence. Now the sheet can return upstairs. It has been entered in the representative washing book, separated with white linen, inspected, soaked, rubbed, boiled, rinsed, lightly blued, dried, moved into the dry room, mangled, checked, folded, and made available. Each verb belongs to a period process. The claim that Sarah managed the weekly supply belongs directly to Audley End. The sheet joins them as an explanatory object. On the return route, the service wing begins to disappear behind the finished surface. The coal shed no longer appears as heat. The drain no longer appears as removed water. The blue no longer appears as color management. The mangle no longer appears as pressure. The iron no longer appears as risk. The sheet carries results without carrying labels. A housemaid opening it in a bedroom receives the laundry's output as an input to another task. She makes the bed, aligns the linen, and prepares the room. The sheet becomes part of bedroom service. The departments meet through the object even if the workers do not share the room at the same time. The family then encounters a state. The bed is ready. That state can feel natural because the sequence producing it has ended elsewhere. The clean surface does not announce Sarah running the cycle or Ellen's labor. It announces the house's standard. The same change occurs with table linen. A pressed cloth becomes the base for dining service. Napkins become part of place settings. Staff uniforms become part of the visual discipline of service. Family clothing becomes part of personal look. The laundry distributes order into other scenes. This distribution explains why the weekly cycle supported the mansion more broadly than the laundry's physical size suggests. The laundry's products appeared in bedrooms, dining spaces, dressing routines, kitchens, and servants' work. When the laundry succeeded, many rooms could perform their own functions. When it failed, shortage and visible disorder traveled outward. The wet and dry division can now be read as a miniature of the whole service system. Work was separated so that each environment could control its own risks. Results moved across thresholds. Senior servants managed flows. Junior servants executed stages. Owners received the combined result as domestic life. But the miniature has two names that prevent it from becoming abstract. Sarah Barrance managed the weekly cycle. Ellen Findell stood second in the laundry. They were present at Audley End in 1881. Whatever else remains unknown, the clean linen can no longer be described as if the house produced it by itself. Their record also corrects the scale at which history is often told. Audley End's owners shaped architecture, patronage, inheritance, and display. Those histories matter. The laundry asks a different question. What did that ownership require every week? The answer is not another grand event. It is repeated, skilled conversion. The answer includes infrastructure, purposeful rooms, water, drainage, fuel, airflow, drying space, tables, storage, pressure, and irons made work possible. It includes supplies whose use had to be controlled. It includes enough textile stock to cover delay. It includes a hierarchy able to assign accountability. It includes uncertainty as well. No weekly count has been invented. No wage range has been turned into a personal pay packet. No general handbook step has been attributed to Sarah as a quotation. No emotion has been placed in Ellen's mind. The gaps remain because the women do not need fictional repair in order for their work to matter. What the sources support is already substantial. English heritage identifies the women, their ranks, Sarah running the cycle, Ellen's possible travel, the census obstacle, and the 2 laundry rooms. Beaton supplies a period model of the weekly work. The 1880 Servant Guide supplies hierarchy, wage context, and the semi-outdoor category. Comparative properties show that laundry could shape buildings and preserve specialized gear. The process supported by those sources is not a spectacle of suffering or nostalgia. It is a sequence of choices with consequences. Classify incorrectly, and color or fiber can be damaged. Prepare poorly, and the next day slows. Rinse incompletely, and soap remains. Dry badly, and moisture defeats the finish. Feed a fold into pressure, and the fault deepens. Skip the iron test, and a scorch can erase the week's value. Those consequences accumulated in cloth rather than in a formal report. Grayed white linen could reveal incomplete washing or rinsing. Uneven blue could reveal poor mixing. A hard crease could preserve bad setup before the mangle. A shine or scorch could identify excessive heat. Dampness could survive beneath an apparently dry outer fold. The finished article carried a check record in its surface. Quality control therefore continued until the handoff. A sheet could pass one stage and still fail the next. Clean but damp was not ready. Dry but badly creased was not finished. Smooth but scorched was damaged. Beautifully pressed but missing from the returned count was unavailable. The household requirement joined material state to place and time. This helps explain why a first maid was needed in a laundry of only 2 named workers. Responsibility did not rise only with staff numbers. It rose with the number of needs that had to be met at once. The correct objects had to be clean, intact, dry, finished, counted, and ready. A fault in any one state could undo success in the others. The weekly rhythm offered one opportunity for correction and one pressure against delay. A remaining stain might be treated again before boiling. A doubtful iron could be tested. A damp sheet could stay on the horse or line. Yet every correction consumed time and space needed by the rest of the load. Judgment meant knowing when more work protected the object, and when more work only exposed it to further risk. Nothing in this chain required Sarah or Ellen to think of themselves in modern managerial terms. Their titles and duties belonged to Victorian domestic service. Still, the work plainly required inventory, priorities, assignments, checks, upkeep, and delivery. Naming those functions does not elevate the servants out of their historical position. It clarifies what that position required. The household could treat the final pile as a routine supply, because the laundry had converted uncertainty into categories. Whites here, colors there, fine pieces under closer control, greasy cloths under harsher method, wet work before dry finish, hot iron only after a test. Each category reduced the chance that one method would be applied blindly to every object. The result was not perfect control. Weather could change, stains could resist, gear could fail, and names could vanish from later records. The value of the system was that it made those pressures manageable enough for clean linen to recur. Repetition was the proof. The sheet did not return once as a demonstration. It returned because the house required the cycle again and again. Sarah's position mattered at the points where choices accumulated. Her managerial duty was fulfilled across the load, not in a single heroic action. Ellen's position mattered because enough hands and steady work turned decisions into finished stock. Their laundry turned duty into clean stock ready to use. The final state was deliberately undramatic. Clean linen waited where it should. Family clothing returned. Staff uniforms could be worn. The house did not pause to acknowledge the cycle, because the purpose of the cycle was to prevent a pause. That is why the sheet works as the final object. It does not survive as a monument to one wash day. It returns to use and loses the evidence of its root. The very success of Sarah and Ellen's work made their contribution harder to see. The rooms preserve what the object forgets. One room accepted used water, heat, soap, soil, and the first danger of damage. The other accepted clean but unfinished cloth and controlled air, pressure, starch, and iron. The threshold between them divided removal from finish. Across that threshold, the title promise can now be answered. 2 laundry maids kept a Victorian mansion, supplied with clean linen, by managing a weekly system, not by performing one undifferentiated wash. Sarah Barrance held first duty. Ellen Findell served as second. Their work depended on separating materials, staging time, controlling heat and water, protecting fabric, and moving each item through the correct room. The answer must remain bounded. We do not know their exact conversation, pay, weekly piece count, or complete life stories. We do know that the Braybrookes household required enough clean linen, family clothes, and staff uniforms, and that Sarah managed that requirement in 1881. We know Ellen's rank and the possibility that her duty traveled to London. We know the service wing preserves wet and dry laundries as they stood in 1882. The final sheet has no name sewn into this account. It is not claimed as an Audley End survivor. It stands for the recurring object that made the documented duty necessary. Used, counted, separated, transformed, finished, and returned. It carries the causal shape of the week. At the end of that week, the mansion appears clean, without appearing busy. A bed is ready. A table can be laid. One uniform can be worn. The visible order belongs to Audley End. The work that restored it belongs, in the surviving record, to Sarah Barrance and Ellen Findell. One name remains easier to follow than the other. One possible journey ends at an uncertain spelling. The archive does not give us a private conclusion. It gives us a practical one. A sheet crosses from the wet laundry into the dry laundry. Water has removed what it can. Air, pressure, starch, and heat give the cloth its final state. Sarah Barrance is responsible for the cycle. Ellen Findell is second within it. Then the clean linen leaves their rooms, returns upstairs, and allows the house to look as though none of this work has happened.